You saw the title. I strongly believe the wired Xbox 360 controller is the greatest gaming controller ever made. If you can stand that, then why don't you hang around to find out why? Here are my reasons in no particular order. First off is the price of the controller. Mint examples can be found in the classifieds for about 15 AUD or about twice that on eBay. Still, even 30 AUD, 20 USD, isn't much to spend on the best controller of all time. I've paid twice that again to get this absolute beauty. This particular example was found on Facebook Marketplace free. That is because the thumbsticks were very chewed and it was filthy, but a couple bucks on new thumbsticks from eBay and a tear down and wash solved that issue, which leads on to my next point. Repairability. Unlike its wireless counterpart, the wired 360 controller only requires the removal of 7 Phillips head screws versus 7 Torx screws, which makes replacing components like the thumbsticks more user-friendly because it doesn't require specialist tools. It's not uncommon for thumbsticks to get worn after hundreds of hours of peggle, and the feeling of new ones is immensely satisfying, making the ability to replace them not so much of a luxury but a necessity for the true gamer. Number 3 on this list, and an obvious one, is the fact that it has a wire. This means that Microsoft charged a lower price for it when new, and that there is going to be slightly less input lag upon button presses. Of course, this is not usually enough to be noticed, but can still make a slight difference when playing online shooters if you want every advantage possible. This wire also has a USB connector on the end, which is good because it means it's incredibly versatile. Plus, you never have to worry about replacing batteries. It's annoying when your batteries go dead in the middle of a gaming session, and they can be expensive to replace all the time in the long run. Versatility is another huge reason why the wired Xbox 360 controller is hugely superior to anything else. It works with nearly any computer so long as it has a USB 2.0 or better port somewhere on it. Supported operating systems include Windows XP to 11, most Linux distros, Mac OS and iOS to name just a few. Personally, I use it for emulators like PCSX2 because of its great compatibility. Reason number 5 is the layout and size of the controller. Just the positioning of the buttons and triggers is the closest to perfect, at least for me, of any controller I've ever held. It also has all the buttons that you'll ever need for playing most games, and if you need any more than this, you may as well just use a keyboard and mouse. I prefer the larger size of the Xbox 360 controller over something like PlayStation's DualShock controllers because it fits better in my hands. Coming in 6th is the design of the button mechanisms. The tactile click of the face buttons is pleasant, and I prefer it to the spongy feeling of the face buttons on most other controllers. However, here is what I consider the only flaw: the D-pad. It's quite controversial, and personally I think it's not a great D-pad design, but still beats Microsoft's newer offerings by a long way. It's got a good amount of travel, but is just slightly oversensitive. The margins for diagonals are also very wide when compared to the cardinals, which are much smaller. Anyway, back to the good parts. The triggers are amazing, and I find that they work incredibly well for brake and throttle control in racing games like Forza Horizon 4, which I play a lot. The fantastic analog control means that I normally don't have to worry about assists like traction control and ABS for most cars. Finally, and this is a big one, durability. The 360 controller is so much more durable than its descendants, and many have gone through tens of thousands of hours of use with no issues at all, making this controller a bargain at less than quarter of the price of a new Xbox One controller, but with build quality 10 times as good. That's all my main talking points about the Xbox 360 controller. However, I've compared it to a few other controllers to see exactly what it is that makes the 360 controller better than its rivals, as well as older and newer generation controllers. I'll give each controller a score out of 100, with 100 being the 360 controller and 0 being the Philips CDI 220 controller. To start with, the 360 controller versus its evolution, the Xbox One controller. Here I have the regular wireless Xbox One controller, and already I prefer the feel of the triggers on the 360 controller because they are slightly firmer, allowing for more precise control of certain in-game actions like the aforementioned pedal control. Everything else other than the D-pad is pretty similar as expected. As for the D-pad, well, it's not great on either controller, but the Xbox 360 controller gets the win here. Overall, not too much of a difference between either controller, but the Xbox One fails miserably in one area: build quality. Xbox One controllers in general, and it's the same with Elite controllers, are great for the first few months or maybe years after you get them, depending on how much they get used, but it's usually not too long even before stuff starts to break. Myself and friends of mine have experienced stick drift, broken bumpers, sticky triggers, and connectivity issues. I own many genuine Xbox 360 controllers, and none have ever had any major problems other than wear on the sticks. Now to compare with its direct competitor at the time, the PS3 controller. For the purpose of this comparison, I'll be using a DualShock 3, but the 6-axis controller is identical apart from the former having haptic feedback tech built in. I prefer the size of the Xbox 360 controller because I have fairly large hands that feel a bit cramped on the DualShock, but that's not the case for everybody. The ideal controller layout varies by game to game in terms of swapping around the left stick and D-pad, but I reckon the 360's layout is preferable for most games, but that's not to say I can't see the advantages of having the D-pad as the primary movement controls for some games. Because the face buttons on the DualShock 3 do support analog control, when playing Gran Turismo 5 with the default controls, I find that you really have to push the X button in order to maintain full throttle, which gets uncomfortable quick. That's probably the worst part for me about this controller, but there is something else that annoys me, and that's the L2 and R2 buttons. With the Xbox 360 controller, the triggers are really ergonomic with the way that they flow upwards around your finger. Alternatively, with the PS3's controller, I find that it's necessary to actively pull your finger up to keep it from slipping off of the trigger. This is because, for some reason, rather than having the triggers flow upward like on the 360 controller, or even being completely flat, the DualShock 3 triggers curve downwards, which as far as I can tell, serves no purpose other than maybe for aesthetic. The Xbox 360 controller also beats all of these controllers because it's far more versatile and supports more games. Obviously, these controllers were made for 2D games and do generally work better with those games that they were designed for, but the addition of triggers and sticks on the 360 controller makes it the only controller you'll ever need to buy, no matter what you want to play. The Nintendo Wii was another competitor of the Xbox 360 at the time and had an innovative new controller that supported motion control. The Wiimote is an awesome controller that can be used for some impressive things like head tracking in VR, flying drones and driving RC cars, or interactive whiteboards. Admittedly, the 360 controller can't really be used in the same way for any of these crazy projects, but it's more useful generally when it comes to things that most people use a controller for, like gaming. The 360 required the Kinect sensor to support motion control, but unlike the Wii, motion control wasn't a very central part of the play experience on the 360 or any other console I can think of for that matter. Well, that just about concludes the video, and I would like to thank you all for watching. Let me know in the comments if, like me, you're looking forward to the release of the Hyperkin Xenon controller. If you don't already know, Hyperkin is a peripheral manufacturer who have obtained a license from Microsoft in order to resurrect the original wired Xbox 360 controller. It looks awesome, plus should work on modern Xbox Series consoles.